Hello everyone, this is Wes Henson, pastor of the Ridge Church. And the Ridge Church campus is located at 7350 Old Highway 13 in Carbondale, Illinois. And I want to thank you for joining me today as we give a quick on-the-go summary of this week's small group Bible study for the week of February the 27th, 2022 at the Ridge Church. Now this week we conclude our study titled, How to Avoid Life's Pitfalls. And over the last 5 weeks we have looked in the Old Testament book of Genesis and focused on the life of Joseph. And we began our study of Joseph's life when he was 17 years old. And we find out that his brothers hated him and they looked for an opportunity to kill him. And when the opportunity arose, rather than killing him, they sold him off and into slavery, and on to Egypt he went. And then in Egypt, he served the household of Potiphar. Potiphar was part of the military of Pharaoh, and he served Potiphar well. But when Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of attempting to seduce her, consequently, Potiphar put Joseph in prison, and there he sat. And while he was in prison, he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and baker. And the dream of the cupbearer was that he would soon be restored to his previous position. And so Joseph asked the cupbearer that when he was restored to his position, would he please talk to Pharaoh about releasing him from prison so that he could return to his family. But the cupbearer forgot. And then we talked about hard times. Pharaoh one night had a dream. Actually, he had two dreams, one right after the other. And no one could interpret the dreams. And it was at that moment that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. And Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and Joseph relayed to Pharaoh what God was going to do, that there were hard times ahead. In fact, there was going to be 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph had a plan already in his mind, and he shared it with Pharaoh. And that plan caused Pharaoh to put Joseph in charge of the whole country, only second to him. He was catapulted to incredible success. And then last week we focused on the pitfall of bitterness. The famine had begun, and Jacob sent his sons to Egypt so that they could buy food. However, Joseph would not allow Benjamin, his youngest son, Joseph's full brother, to go with them. When the brothers got to Egypt and were in front of Joseph, Joseph recognized who they were, but they did not recognize him. And he developed a plan, another plan, for having all of his brothers, including Benjamin, to meet with him personally. And his plan worked. And all of his brothers found themselves in his presence. And just like the dream that he had that we looked at in our first week, they all bowed down before him. And it was at that moment that with great emotion, Joseph revealed that he was their brother. Okay, if you click on the links, you'll find a study guide and a summary of this week's lesson. And then you can join us on campus Sunday morning at 9 a.m. or join us online Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. on Facebook or our website as we go into detail. All right, let's take a look at our lesson for this week. The point of our study this week is that we can only move forward when we embrace God's forgiveness. Now, Joseph invited his father Jacob as well as his brothers and their families to relocate to Egypt so that they could live near him in the land of Goshen. And so Jacob agreed and spent the remainder of his life, some 20-some years, spent the remainder of his life in Egypt, and Joseph cared for him. Just before Jacob died, he blessed his sons, and then after his death, Joseph and his brothers took Jacob's body back to Canaan and buried him there. So we're going to pick up today in Genesis chapter 50, beginning in verse 15. So when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, well, if Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the suffering that we caused him. And so they sent this message to Joseph. Before he died, they said, your father gave a command. Say this to Joseph, please forgive your brother's transgressions and their sin, the suffering that they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when their message came to him. His brothers also came to him and bowed down before him and said, "We are your slaves." So the truth in these verses is that in humility, recognize your own sinful behavior. And that was exactly what Joseph's brothers did. So all was going well in the land of Egypt with Jacob and Joseph and the family until the day that Jacob died. And after the passing of their father, their brothers began to wonder if Joseph's love would now turn to hate. And the brothers had reason to feel paranoid. What they had done to Joseph all those years ago was quite deplorable. But in Joseph's mind, their fears were unfounded. And true to his past, Joseph was full of grace toward them. For you see, he had truly buried the past. Now, the point here is that although Joseph had forgiven his brothers years ago, the brothers were not able to live with forgiveness until the time that they accepted it. And I think that's an example of how we are before God. God forgives our sin, but we're only able to live with that forgiveness when we accept it. Okay, let's move on down to verses 19 and 20. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me, but God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people." And the truth here is that we need to refocus on God's providence, on God's purpose, and God's plan. You see, there's no indication that God was the cause of any of Joseph's pain. However, God intended to use the pain of Joseph from his past for a much higher purpose in the future. What others meant for evil, God intended for good. And verse 20 says, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. So God had a plan to use the pain and suffering that Joseph went through in order to further his purpose in the world. All right, let's move on down to verse 21. Therefore, Joseph says, "Don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So the truth here is that we are to receive God's forgiveness and comfort. Joseph's brothers had lived a broken, messy life, and Joseph sought to bring healing and clean matters up between them by demonstrating love and compassion to them. It was his undeserved affection that altered the course of their lives. So to be treated with kindness, especially when it's unwarranted, is staggering. Paul writes in Romans chapter 2, verse 5, he says that it is God's kindness that leads us to repentance. It's an interesting verse, Romans 2:4. I invite you to take a look at it for yourself. From the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation, the most attractive quality of God is his love for the broken. Our greatest need is to feel the full pardon of the Father. Our greatest need is to know that we are accepted no matter what crimes that we have committed. And when we come to God, he responds to us, even as Joseph responded to his brothers. God responds to us with compassion. Salvation, grace, and a new life in Jesus are all wrapped up in God's love. Okay, so let's make a couple of applications here from our lesson. And application number one is, stay humble. God is stronger than you know, and you are weaker than you know. Embracing your small part in God's grand story or God's grand purpose is not only the biblical thing to do, but it's a healthy way to live. God is in control, so we can stop trying to be. One of the things that we can do is make a list of the ways that, that we've tried to be in control, even this past week. Okay, application number 2, stop the hate. Stop hating people for hurting you. The price that we pay for holding others to their past is steep, and in the end, we punish ourselves for the actions of others. This is not the grace of God at work in us. And so here's something we can do. Make a list of those for whom you hold a grudge and make a prayer list. Okay, application number 3, seek grace. Seek the grace of God anew. You know, we don't mean to do it, but we travel back to Egypt so quickly. We go back to bondage. We forget that we are forgiven. And because of him, because of Jesus, we are enough. We do measure up. And so we can make a list of the reasons that we have to celebrate God's grace. All right, let's wrap it all up here this evening or this afternoon or whenever you're watching this. We're all like a book, aren't we? We're living out a story, and between the two covers are moments of crushing loss and of great victory. And this is what makes the story of Joseph so practical and so powerful. And as we move forward, let's remember the lessons that God has taught us through the life of Joseph. Okay, so if you click on the links, you'll find a study guide, a summary of this week's lesson, along with a couple of handouts. And then you can join us on campus Sunday morning at 9 a.m. or online Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. on Facebook or our website as we go into detail. Okay, bye for now.